In 1955, I turned 50. I was blessed with a beautiful wife and a beautiful child. Although not a career civil servant, I was now a fixture in Whitehall. My job was to coordinate Britain's atomic bomb project, not a task I relished. The Cold War cast a chill shadow across us all. One spring evening, in the run-up to the general election, my wife Margaret and I were invited to a party in Lord North Street, the London home of Roger Quaife, a youngish Conservative MP who was beginning to be talked about. It was an evening that set me on one of the most extraordinary adventures of my career.
Hello. Caro told me you were here. I'm Roger. You're Lewis Elliot, aren't you? And you must be Janet.
Margaret.
Of course. I'm so sorry. And you're David Rubin.
That's right.
I was wondering if I might have a word with you both in the study. Just for a moment.
Is that all right, Margaret?
Don't worry, darling. I'll go and talk to Lady Caroline.
Thank you so much, Margaret. How long are you in town, David?
Till Wednesday.
Terrific. Would you like to come to the festival hall Tuesday night? Peter Sellers is doing a show. You'd love him.
Oh, that'd be fun. Thank you.
And thank you both so much for turning out tonight. There are a few issues I'm trying to get a grip on in advance of the election. You'll appreciate it's on our minds, David.
Of course.
I'm pleased you could come, Lewis.
Thank you for inviting me.
There are very few people in Whitehall with any real grasp of the nuclear issue.
Who do you think's going to win the election?
The Conservative Party will win. I don't believe the press speculation. Now, I'd like to ask you both something, if I may.
Surely.
Do you think the British strategy on nuclear weapons makes sense?
Well, there are certainly a good many reasons why Great Britain should feel it needs to be a nuclear power in the modern world, but personally, I think the expense is difficult to justify with an economy your size.
All right. Put in its crudest terms, how significant is our weapons program?
You'll never count for more than 2% of the world's nuclear stockpile.
But it gets us a place at the table, doesn't it?
Certainly, but that isn't necessarily much practical use. If there were an exchange of nuclear weapons, Great Britain would be obliterated before the first bomb fell on America.
All right. Well, what about American policy? Doesn't it depend on retaining technical superiority over the Russians? And how long do you expect that to last?
Neither side will be able to rely on bombers anymore because anti-aircraft missiles are getting too good. Rockets capable of carrying nuclear warheads up into space and across continents are the essential tools of a future conflict. Without them, you're out of the race. Now, I estimate the Russians will have an effective intercontinental missile system within 10 years.
And where will that lead you?
Either we'll blow up the world or agree to bury the damn things.
It's your turn now, Lewis.
As a civil servant, I obviously don't have a view. I spent a lot of the war helping the Barford people make us a bomb. A lot of my work is still concerned with supporting their research.
I'd very much like to meet some of your old colleagues from Barford, particularly Sir Walter Luke and Sir Francis Getliff. Could you arrange that for me?
Certainly.
And what about you, though?
I'm sorry.
You must have an opinion.
Not one that's necessarily relevant.
Don't worry. I'm not out to get you the sack. I'd just like to know what you think.
Well, privately, I am pretty much against nuclear weapons.
I was aware of that.
Were you? How?
Never mind. Tell me your reasons.
Francis Getliff is the strategy expert. He reckons the rules of the nuclear game are inherently flawed because they're too difficult to stick to. The bombs have to work, but mustn't ever be used. That doesn't allow for ambition, temper, political unrest, economic disaster, or extremism.
I see. As a matter of interest, as a government employee, do you feel at all compromised by our party's policy?
I really don't want to answer that.
A shame. But I understand. Let's put it another way. Lewis, what do you think of Tory policy?
I think there are some Tories who understand the nonsense of building more bombs. But I'm afraid I think your party is living in the wrong age. We talked on for a while. Roger interrogated David and myself very gently and listened more than he spoke. Against my better judgment, Roger impressed me. He was very well briefed, and by the time we parted, he'd fathomed exactly where I stood on nuclear weapons, but I had no idea about him.
Here you are, the division bell, Roger.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Lewis. I have appreciated your candid remarks. Please don't leave. We shan't be long. How's it,
What's the matter, Lewis?
It's one of the first rules of Whitehall.
What is?
Don't give yourself away.
How important is Roger Quaife really going to be?
He'll probably be a minister in the new government. Then, who knows?
Do you like him?
I don't know. But I do know I wouldn't give his party the time of day.
I remember very clearly the afternoon I met with you and Hector Rose straight off the plane from America to tell you we'd made a bomb. I remember how confused you both looked. Like you didn't know whether to be pleased or terrified.
I'm not confused anymore. Having children of my own sorted that out.
I don't know if sentimentality has much of a place in the politics of the nuclear age.
That would be a shame. I think it might save our skins. The election went according to plan, or rather, according to the plans of Roger's friends. Their party came back with a majority of 60. As prophesied, Roger duly got office, serving as Parliamentary Secretary to Lord Gilby, in whose office I served alongside a rising star of the civil service, Douglas Osbaldiston.
We had a real purpose during the war. It was essential to have a department like this, coordinating the development of new weapons and sorting out the industries to make them. But that's pretty much over. We're a bit of a white elephant. I think of our job as being to keep things ticking over until this department gets a thorough overhaul.
But I don't think we're entirely without purpose, Lord Gilby.
I didn't say we were, Osbaldiston. But I'm sure we'll all be well pleased when we get given a bright, shiny coat of new paint and a clear remit into the bargain. I liken it to guiding the Fighting Temeraire safely back to Portsmouth before she gets a refit. Or decommissioned. Does anyone want that tea cake?
You go ahead, sir.
Mind you, it will most likely do us all here a bit of good, having a live wire like Quaife as my spokesman in the Commons. Do we know anything about him? Is he signed?
There'll be a lot of interest in his maiden statement next week.
What do we want him to talk about?
At some point, the government is going to have to make a statement about our nuclear strike force. Do we stick with aircraft or move to long-range missiles?
What do you think, Osbaldiston?
About what, sir?
This suit.
Sir?
Got into Selfridges. Never bought anything off the peg in my life. Got talked into it. And you know what?
What, sir?
I don't think it's half bad. Makes one wonder what those Jermyn Street Johnnies are up to.
Sir, regarding Quaife's maiden statement, we need to say something about a British nuclear missile. The Navy, the Air Force, and our industrial friends are all getting edgy.
Well, yeah. Well, we can't go making any pronouncements, you know. We probably need to slow things down.
Surely the Cabinet will want to say something soon.
I doubt it. No one's mentioned it to me.
Does that mean there won't be a policy white paper on nuclear defence?
Not unless or until it's unavoidable. Well then, that's what Quaife's maiden statement should be about. It should be a holding action, referring to discussion concerning the next stage in our nuclear weapons program. Missiles, that sort of thing. Do your usual, Osbaldiston. I'll clear it with the PM's office. Let's just hope Quaife manages to remember his lines and not bump into the furniture.
I want this House to be certain that in the government's opinion this is a matter of profound importance, but not something we should rush into.
This isn't what I wrote. How
There is a
different is
view
it? He's completely redone it.
The Russians may have an intercontinental missile system capable of thwarting Western defenses and of delivering nuclear warheads to targets in Europe and America. This government takes the view that Great Britain should consider creating a comparable missile system of its own.
God, he's not going to make a commitment, sure.
However,
Listen.
The enormous cost of such a program would, without doubt, affect other areas of public spending. Consequently, this government believes that we ought not to confirm our intention to commit to nuclear missile development until the fullest possible range of scientific opinion has been sought concerning the inevitability of such a step.
Thank God for that.
Not bad for his first ministerial speech. I'll be out of a job at this rate. Maybe Gilby ought to watch out.
What do you mean?
That wasn't the performance of a man without ambition.
Where did that bit about consulting scientific opinion come from?
No idea. He completely redrafted the speech himself. I must say, though, he really is spectacularly well briefed. One cannot deny that this afternoon Roger Quaife has shown all the right instincts. He understands just how fully one must embrace the principle of inexplicitude.
Afterwards, in the lobby of the House, Roger Quaife asked me to come to his home in Lord North Street around 11. This was a shock to the system, as Lord Gilby refused ever to work beyond 5. What he told me that evening was to change my life.
I've seen an early edition of the Times. Marvelous. If they'd been reviewing a play, then I think I'd run long enough to please the investors.
The Times is the most important. You know, Lewis, they hardly paid any attention to Gilby's statement in the Lords. It was all about Roger.
I'm very pleased for you. I couldn't live in the public gaze like that.
Oh, that's what it's all about, Lewis. Playing to the gallery.
That's good about the Times, of course, but I wonder how it'll go in the Manchester Guardian. Now, I was thinking it would be useful if we could come up with a way of getting me on with Dimbleby.
I'm off to bed. Good night, Lewis.
Good night, Lady Caroline.
Night, Roger.
Night. What did you think of this afternoon?
I thought it went down very well.
What did you get from the statement?
It was a very effective holding action.
But you'd like to have heard something more, wouldn't you? I mean, you'd like it if the government made some changes to its defense policy.
That's not my business. Actually, I wanted to say something about that.
About what?
My attitudes. When we spoke before the election, I told you what I thought. But I hope you don't imagine I'd let my personal opinions get in the way of doing my job.
No, I don't. But it would be nice for you if the two things could come together in some way, wouldn't it?
I don't understand.
Lewis, I want your help. But I'm going to need you to be absolutely honest with me.
Right.
You want to make the world a better place. More than that, you'd like to save it from destruction, wouldn't you?
I am disgusted that anyone could seriously consider a nuclear war.
I agree. Indeed, if the race between the Americans and the Soviets continues, I think the outcome is inevitable.
I'm surprised to hear you say that.
I have come to the opinion that it isn't realistic for Great Britain to try and keep pace with the USA and the USSR. We have to get out from under this thing, and the way to do it is to broker a treaty that will wind down the number of atomic bombs in the world. I believe we can help to avoid a nuclear war and save the British economy from bankruptcy into the bargain. And that's what I'm out to achieve. You look shocked. Isn't that what you want too?
Certainly. But it's a tall order given the kind of government we have.
You may not like Toryism, Lewis, but take it or leave it, we're the only party that can get things done. The Americans think Labour are idiots, besides which it'll be a decade before they get back in. And if you haven't already gathered it, then I'll tell you to keep in mind that I'm my own man. I may have to keep my head down until the right moment, but I'm going to do something important. That's for sure.
I don't know what to say.
Lewis, are you going on this journey with me?
I'm not sure I understand.
I need a team, an inner circle who know what we're trying for, and I want you to coordinate it.
I am amazed and honored. Of course I will.
Well, the whole thing is, of course, academic if we can't get a real grip on power. I need Gilby's job.
I was shocked and excited by Roger's declaration. I had felt the full muscular force of his determination. He asked me to contact my scientific knights. I did so immediately. Francis Getliff was 52, a statesman of science, and our top expert on nuclear strategy. Walter Luke was the cleverer man, but less celebrated than Getliff. Even so, at 43, he was already head of the atomic energy establishment. I arranged the lunch date. Roger was late and briefly apologized before ushering us straight to the table and revealing his hand.
Bloody hell.
Now, Sir Walter, I am aware there is a body of scientific opinion, chiefly represented by a former colleague of yours, Professor Brodzinski, which believes Britain should develop its own long-range missile. I'd like to hear your opinion on that.
This is a lot to take in. Well, first off, technically speaking, what they want might be possible. Only 50-50, though.
And why is that?
You need a substantial infrastructure. Launch sites, factory workshops nearby, tracking stations, etc., none of which could be sited in this country. It would all have to be done at arm's length in, say, Australia. Also, the money you have to pour in to get a result out is really quite staggering.
And what do you think, Sir Francis?
I think developing our own long-range missile is a completely ridiculous idea.
Indeed?
The price tag would be too awful.
Well, how many millions?
No, I don't mean money. I mean the end of the world.
Besides, we just can't play in this league, Quaife. A long-range missile would cost the same as the entire bloody defence budget for the next 10 years. Then what would we have? A single weapon strand, which in reality we couldn't use.
And what do you think of those scientists who are supporting a new missile?
I don't believe most of them can think straight. A lot are European immigrants who can't stand the Soviets and can't see beyond their own yearning to incinerate communism. They tend to be frighteningly unbending. In that regard, Brodzinski is certainly a perfect example of the type.
I see. I asked Lewis to organize a couple of taxis for us after lunch.
Where are we going?
I'm not sure I should tell you.
Sir Francis and Sir Walter.
Professor?
Indeed, it is a great opportunity you are allowing me. I'm so pleased that the government minister is making these efforts to progress our plans.
I'm grateful that you were able to give us some of your time, Professor Brodzinski.
It is important you should understand, Parliamentary Secretary, that there is nothing which is technically novel in my proposals. Everything has been proven. Sir Walter, my esteemed former colleague, will assure you that I'm not overstating my case.
Well, maybe so, but I do have a few reservations.
What reservations? Sir Walter, you must explain yourself to me.
Come off it, Brod. You've always known I don't agree with your budget projections.
I don't think we need to get into detail of that kind.
What?
So, Walter, I would prefer to bow to the Professor's assurances, at least for the moment. I believe it's up to us to establish some principles and proceed from there.
I see.
Well done, Parliamentary Secretary. We have to get something moving. We must get something done. Even if we started tonight, it would take us until 1963 to have the weapons operational.
By which time they won't have any strategic meaning.
We need missiles, Parliamentary Secretary. When can we expect some action?
You understand, I mustn't raise false hopes.
You are going to say that will cost £1,000 million. Some say we cannot afford it.
No.
I say we cannot afford not to do it.
Let me say something to you. Within these four walls, I think it will be a hard job to convince my own minister, Lord Gilby. Without a cabinet minister behind us, no government would begin to listen.
That afternoon, I saw the full depth of Quaife's cunning. He had ambushed us with Brodzinski in the knowledge that Luke and Getliff might otherwise have refused to meet him. Then he'd mentioned Lord Gilby as a hurdle to Brodzinski's plans, so now Brodzinski saw Gilby as his enemy. That meant Brodzinski would be doing Quaife's dirty work for him, ruining Gilby's reputation.
What the bloody hell are you up to, Quaife?
I'm sorry if you didn't like what I said just now.
You made it sound like you're on his side.
He's a mad Polish bastard. You can't take him seriously.
Brodzinski has influence, and he's going to need careful handling. It isn't going to be easy to get rid of the bomb. We're going to have to tell lies and play games. Now, if you two don't want to get your hands dirty, then you might as well clear off, because you're of no use to me. You know, if I wasn't prepared to play rough, then I wouldn't be any use to you either.
During the winter, gossip radiated out from the clubs and the Whitehall corridors that Lord Gilby was past it. Roger had Gilby in his sights and was going to keep going until the old man buckled. Prominent figures in commerce and industry were smiling on Quaife because they'd heard about Brzezinski's hero worship. Then early in February, Roger's stock took another leap upwards when he was invited to spend a weekend at Bassett, Diana Skidmore's house in Hampshire. It clearly wasn't a coincidence that Margaret and I were invited too. Late 50s, not what you'd call pretty, but she's got a kind of sexual charge.
Funny thing to say.
Well, it's true. For heaven's sake, Margaret, don't imagine I find Diana Skidmore attractive.
Why say it, then? I suppose it's the money thing, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, money is sexy. So is power. I'm always amazed by all those tubby little men with gorgeous young wives at the Opera House. It has to be what they've got in their wallets.
You have a lot in common with Diana.
Do you really think they'll have footmen serving at supper?
Certainly.
You'd have thought 2 wars would have put paid to that sort of thing.
That hasn't changed a thing.
Why is Diana so involved with the Tories?
Her husband was always a power behind the scenes, and she's determined to carry on where he left off. I'm sure you and she will get on. In fact, I'm hoping you'll be my eyes and ears among the ladies.
What should I be watching out for?
I'd be interested to know how Roger is doing with this lot. Diana is a good judge of people's exchange rate. The frequency of a man's invitation to Bassett bears a high correlation to his political progress. Her judgment is pretty much infallible.
Lewis!
Whoops! I didn't see the entrance. Sorry. There.
I don't believe it. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Heavens above. It is.
Tell me quickly, who's going to be here?
A brace of life peers. Then there'll be the Quaifes and Montague Cave, probably on his own, as everyone says his wife is playing around. Poor man.
Yes, but don't say that to anyone. It'll make us sound suburban. To these people, affairs are like having one's bicycle stolen. An inconvenience, but not worth changing one's plans for.
And there will be a cabinet minister, Collingwood. Now, he's the one to watch. You'd think he was singularly ill-equipped for office, given he has no conversation at all, but he has an eye like a hawk in matters of politics. He has enormous backstage influence, the eminence grise of the party hierarchy.
Ah, Elliot, I wondered if it was you. To be honest, I wasn't sure enough to speak up at table. Now, how's old Gilby? Here he isn't doing so well.
Hard to believe that a lovely old cove like you can be so bashful, Reggie.
Well, that's it, isn't it? No good at the banter, I'm afraid. The war put a lot of us where we ought not to be. Oh, I'm sorry, no one has introduced us. I'm Reggie. I presume you must be Mrs. Elliot.
That's right. How do you do, Lord Collingwood?
Oh, Reggie. Reggie.
Reggie.
You'll have to forgive me. I'm supposed to have a word with old Viscount thingamajig over there. Hope to see you later.
I was entertained watching Roger at work, a political animal in the jungle of the offstage Conservative Party. Then after the meal, Margaret and I went for a stroll. We arrived back in the drawing room to discover a full-blown row in progress.
I meant to say that I don't expect he spends much time in the company of people who have to work for a living.
That's uncalled for. True, Carrie. But then it was uncalled for that he should write and publish a book like that.
What does he know about Anglo-Indian relations? He's never been there. How dare he take sides with Nehru and Gandhi against Churchill?
He can say what he likes, surely. It's a book. It's a treatise on what went wrong in India.
It's a bloody impertinence, and I hope we shan't hear any more from Samikins, if you know what I mean. Doesn't do the party any good, this sort of thing.
I am not my brother's keeper.
Well, my dear, some might say he could do with one.
Then perhaps they had better say it to his face.
It's got to stop, and that's it. If he writes anything like this again or makes any more speeches on the same lines, then the party can't have anything to do with him.
You mean you're ready to take the whip away?
Certainly.
No one likes being out of things, do they?
I'm sorry, Lord Collingwood. I've been standing here trying to keep out of it, but I'm afraid I don't think I can. You know, I utterly disagree with what you've just said.
I don't know how you can, Quaife.
Well, I have the advantage, of course, of knowing Samarkand's very well. Apart from my wife, I don't think anyone else here does. I can tell you straight, if a few more of us had my brother-in-law's kind of spirit, then the Conservative Party would be in a much better state.
Maybe you're confusing spirit with lack of judgment, Quaife.
Everyone in this room who is qualified to come to a serious conclusion about India can't help but agree with what he said. Just because it isn't politically expedient to be saying these things right now, that doesn't make him a fool.
I can't agree.
We need men who have the backbone to say what they really think. That's why we need my brother-in-law. And I'll say it so you understand me, Reggie. If there's any question of him being pushed out, I shouldn't be able to sit quietly by.
Oh, I'm sure you wouldn't. I'm sure you wouldn't.
I didn't doubt that Roger loved his wife, and it was his fierce loyalty to her that had prompted the counterattack against Collingwood. It was a dangerous thing to do, but what else could he have done? If he hadn't defended Caro's brother, that might have been taken for lack of character. The problem would be whether or not Collingwood decided to bear a grudge, and if so, when he might show his hand. Meanwhile, Lord Gilby was the subject of a concerted internal Tory whispering campaign. In March, they got what they wanted, when Gilby's wretchedness precipitated a heart attack, and the doctors weren't sure he'd survive.
This is very civil of you, Elliot.
I hoped you'd like a visit, Lord Gilby.
I hate being in this damned bed. But they won't let me up. I'll confide I told my private secretary to phone around and encourage people to come in. Did he get in touch?
Yes, he did.
You're one of the few that have bothered. But you know, who turns up at your bedside isn't necessarily an indication of who is actually on your side.
I beg your pardon.
Politics has always had its smiling poisoners. I hate it in here. Once I'm discharged. You must let me stand you lunch at the Inn and Out.
Have they said when you might be allowed home?
Oh, about a month. Then another month before I'm back in Parliament. There was a chap standing where you are yesterday, asking me if I was afraid of death.
That was nice of him. Who was he?
Oh, from one of these raggedy-arse little churches. Thought he was comforting me, would you believe?
What did you say?
I've been close to death too many times to start being frightened now. And it's true, you know. I've seen a lot of the battlefield and a lot of men killed. Every year since the war's been a bonus in my book.
Did you enjoy going to war?
Of course I enjoyed it. The first lot particularly. More than anything else in life. Look, Elliot, I know perfectly well that I'm being conspired against. When we were up against the Burmese, we always knew what to do in these situations. I know who's after me, Elliot. I tell you, once I'm back, he'd better watch out. And I don't care if it kills me. You just watch.
Next afternoon, I went to see Roger speak in the House. With Gilby ill, he was acting in charge of the department. Unfortunately, he was responding to a question put down for the specific purpose of undermining Gilby.
Is the Minister aware that his government's defence policy is drifting aimlessly? No decision has yet been announced on which of this government's aircraft research projects is going to be carried through. Is he aware that in the post-war period, British aircraft production is the best in the world? And our scientists and our workers don't deserve to be neglected in this manner.
I'm sure the House will join with me in expressing its good wishes for Lord Gilby's continuing recovery. Obviously, in the Minister's absence, I cannot comment directly on matters of such import and would ask both our factory workers and the honourable members to be patient. These are weighty matters, and while we recognise a response is overdue, we're obviously all going to have to wait a little longer.
After questions, Roger took me along to his room.
Have you visited Gilby yet? Yes. Yes, I've been to see him twice. What did you think? That he's lucky to be alive. If Lord Gilby gets better and comes back to the job, what will you do? He won't be coming back. The party wants rid of him, so he's finished. You know, I don't have anything against Gilby, except that he's got a cabinet job and I need it. What are your chances of taking over the department? Slightly better than evens. Did that night at Bassett do you any harm? I think it might have. But I couldn't do anything else. I'm glad to hear you say it.
They did it to Gilby while he was in hospital. It was leaked that he was sicker than had been thought and ought not to come back to full-time politics. Roger's name was mentioned in the papers alongside other possible replacements. Roger pretended he didn't notice and got on with his job without any fuss. Do you know if you've got the job?
Not yet. I thought I would have heard by now. I'm very much afraid it's all gone wrong.
Nobody said anything to you when you were at the house?
Oh, no, I didn't go in this afternoon. Might have been pushing my luck. How's Margaret?
Fine.
And your little girl?
Fine, too. Getting quite clever.
This is the file with the information you asked for about that hydroelectric project.
I can't deal with it now.
But you asked for
Look,
it.
just take it away, will you? I'll tackle the bloody thing tomorrow.
Sir?
$6:00.
Oh, that's it, Lewis. We've had it. Quaife here? All right, put them through. It's number 10. Hello, Quaife here. Of course. Of course, I'm sure I can be with you by 20 past. I suppose he could still swing either way. Thanks, but no thanks.
Good luck, Roger. I went to my own office to tidy away before going home. There was a message from Margaret saying I was to meet her at Diana Skidmore's London house as soon as I could. I was let into Diana's house and went straight through to the garden, where a select little party was already well underway.
You are looking at the youngest cabinet minister this country has had since the war.
Congratulations, Roger.
What have you got to say for yourself?
I think I'd go so far as to say the situation is pretty all right.
Look here, Roger. I want to give you a proper party. Make a real splash. We can clear the decks here and lay it on for tonight, or have it tomorrow. Which would you like?
I don't think it's quite the right time, Diana.
Oh, come on, Roger, do please say yes.
You deserve it.
Give yourself a night off.
Why on earth isn't it the right time?
There have been thousands of cabinet ministers before me. Most of them didn't deserve a party.
Oh, rubbish. You're you. And I want to have a party for you.
I feel a bit superstitious, if the truth be told. Why not wait until I've actually achieved something?
48 hours after he'd taken up his post, Roger called the scientists, Walter Luke and Francis Getliff, into his office.
This is it. Everything we needed to make a real start is in place. I need the report in 3 months' time, the end of October.
Well done, Roger. Bit scary, though, wouldn't you say?
Why?
Because now we've got to bloody well do it, haven't we?
The first stage is to set up a scientific committee to produce a report which can inform the policies in the white paper. Sir Walter and Sir Francis, I'd like you to form the core of that committee. If you agree, then I will want your conclusions to be brutal, unmediated by protocol. I'm going to assign you Lewis to coordinate and edit the report. I really want this to be a gloves-off affair. I want naked opinion.
Given that Her Majesty's government pays my bloody wages, I have no problem about playing ball with you, Quaife. It's going to be fun working with you again, Lewis.
Thank you, Walter. I hope we can achieve something that will be really important.
What about you, Getliff? You going to join our team?
Sir Francis, I hope you'll come in.
Minister... Of course, it's an honour to be asked.
I doubt it will turn out to be that. I suspect it will become an intolerable nuisance once opinion starts flying about.
I should really rather like to be excused from serving on this committee.
I don't think I can allow that.
Pardon?
Sir Walter Lucan, you are the most experienced man in the country.
What's the matter with you, Getliff?
Francis, the committee will be significantly weaker without you.
Just over a year ago, I was a candidate for the mastership of our Cambridge College. I withdrew. Quite late in the day, I'm sorry to say. I'm having my best scientific ideas right now. I'm of a certain age, and I won't always be able to battle on. I regard time away from my laboratory as a dreadful waste just now.
I make reactors. That means I'm regarded as a sort of glorified plumber. You're the high priest. I'm the temple cleaner. You invented radar. You're our expert on nuclear weapon strategy and the only British scientist who's had close contact with the American hydrogen bomb project. Your presence will make a difference, to say the least, Francis.
I'm afraid I don't much relish the cut and thrust of being in the public eye anymore.
I don't think that's good enough.
Now, please, don't talk to me like that.
As you said, we're of a certain age. Sir Francis... we have duties precisely because of our age and experience.
If, in your judgment, Minister, you feel that I have a contribution to make, then I shall consider myself obliged to accept.
Excellent.
That's very good of you.
Although how you expect us to do this kind of thing and look after our college departments at the same time, I don't really understand. Sometime I'd appreciate a word with you concerning the pressures upon university science in general.
Oh, a bit of spirit. So you're not dead yet, then, Getliff?
And now we've got the beginnings of a very strong committee. I should like to know what you'd feel if I added an unexpected name to the roster.
Who?
I wouldn't mention it if I didn't think it would be wiser to have him inside, where we can keep him under scrutiny, rather than outside working against us.
Who are we talking about?
Brodzinski.
You must be bloody mad!
It's an impossible idea.
You have to look at this from the strategic angle, Francis.
It is a daft idea, Roger.
Everyone here is used to debate, but that isn't Brodzinski's style.
Let's get this straight. It's not my intention to try and convert Professor Brodzinski to the campaign for nuclear disarmament. My reasons for wanting him on the committee are entirely calculated. I want him to get the impression we are giving his views a decent airing and including them in our report. If we don't involve him, he'll have it in for us from the word go. We need to be tactical and, yes, ruthless. You know what we're about here. And I'm afraid I will ask Brodzinski to join us. In fact, I already have.
A week later, at the same office, Michael Brodzinski made his first appearance on the committee. He stared across the table at Roger, hung on his every word, and obviously thought of Quaife as his saviour. Roger's pure energy was intoxicating. He sustained the illusion he was only concerned about nuclear weapons in terms of what would be best for the Tory knights of the shires and their voters.
Lewis, I want you to convene a group of top civil servants to get some administrative machinery ready in time for the scientists' report.
What kind of machinery? The committee isn't supposed to know what they're going to recommend until they've finished their deliberations.
True. Well, then we have to create a mood we can just step into with the scientific report under our arms. We have to conjure up the impression that the committee's conclusions are the only logical ones, that they're inevitable. All right. Let's invent some sort of consultation process we can manipulate. Number one, we'll need someone from the Admiralty.
Why?
Because the thing we're out to scupper first is development of long-range missiles. That means the Navy won't get to launch them from ships or subs. That means no budget increase, maybe even cuts, and they'll bleat about it. So they need to feel they have a voice. But whomever we get mustn't be bright enough to clock what we're really up to.
I'll ask Douglas Osbalderson to make up a list of the most appropriate people, then we can screen out the smart ones.
I'm sure we can get the armed forces on our side by leaking that Brodzinski's plan for a new missile is too expensive and will mean big, big budget cuts for all three services. We'll leak that he's in the minority, and the rest of the committee feels an allocation of such funds would do serious damage to the military. And we'll let it be known that the Treasury has grave doubts.
Does it?
Oh, I have no idea.
You're sure we can't be had up for some kind of intrigue?
This isn't intrigue. It's the mysterious process of crystallizing official opinion. The important thing is to lead senior civil servants into concluding for themselves what's needed. Then they'll start doing the sums, and we'll have the figures at our fingertips when we have to explain the report to the House. It will seem as if I am representing a respectable opinion that already has official weight behind it.
Hector Rose is the most difficult person we'll have to deal with. He'll know if wool is being pulled over his eyes.
I saw him at the opera the other night.
He's tone deaf and hates music.
If the proposed long-range missile development program fails to win approval, that could be good news for the aircraft manufacturers. That'll get them on our side. At least until they get wind we want to scrap their nuclear bombers. Guess who Rose was sitting with at the opera? Your old boss, Lord Lufkin, who, as you know, has interests in aircraft.
You're not suggesting Rose was accepting some sort of bribe?
No, not at all. No, I've no doubt they go back years. We need to cook up ways Lufkin's organization can benefit from a flow of funds into other aspects of the defense industry. I want to create a working relationship with him. You know, I think this department should hold a dinner in honor of Lord Lufkin's 61st birthday.
The dinner was lavish. Lufkin was the same cryptic, vain, opinionated man he was when I worked for him before the war. Roger had made a friend of the old crocodile and lavished such flattery on him that it was embarrassing to listen to. At the end of the meal, after Quaife's perfectly judged words of praise, Lufkin followed on with an appalling Mein Kampf-style paean to himself. Roger now had all his cards lined up, and we were feeling pretty pleased with ourselves. 1 week later, I was standing in the crowded drawing room of the American ambassador's house.
Louis.
Reuben?
I've got something for you. It's sensitive. Ah, what the hell. It'll be all over town in an hour or so.
What is it?
Your people and the French are going into Suez.
I don't believe it, the bloody fools.
Didn't you expect it?
Good God Almighty. Of course it's been talked about, but no sane man would have taken the idea seriously. I am astounded by the stupidity of this damned government.
Well, when a country knows its power is slipping away, it's inclined to do something stupid.
We can't make Egypt into an independent sovereign nation, then invade bits of it according to convenience.
I don't imagine this is playing very well in Washington.
What do you mean?
The United States won't support this.
Bloody Tories. I found a quiet room with a telephone and called Roger. Despite the lateness of the hour, he was in his office and snatched the receiver up immediately. I've just heard.
I can't talk. Things are bad.
Are we really invading Suez?
Yes.
This isn't going to help, is it? The country will be gung-ho and the government won't want to hear about anything that contradicts the mood of the nation.
We'll have to let it go for a while. Good night, Louis.
During the next few days, wherever I went, tempers were more frayed than they had been since the Munich Agreement. Interestingly, while most top civil servants had been devoted to appeasing Hitler, they couldn't tolerate Suez. Hector Rose, our departmental head, astonished me.
I confess I don't see how I'm going to hypnotize myself into voting Conservative again.
I don't think I've ever heard you speak this way, Sir Hector.
I don't care about having to work with these politicians with second-rate minds, but I do care when they fail to show the judgment of so many budgerigars. You're rather close to Roger Quaife, aren't you?
I suppose so.
Closer than one might usually expect a civil servant to be to a politician.
That's more or less true.
The rumour is that he put up some sort of opposition to Suez in cabinet.
I can't really say.
I'm curious because I've come across a good many ministers who were full of puff in public but weren't so brave once they got around the cabinet table.
I'm afraid I can't say.
Well, I don't know if it would be of any use, but you might tell Quaife that there are a number of comparatively sensible people like myself who feel they are suddenly working in a lunatic asylum. I'd like you to communicate that to Quaife, if you wouldn't mind. I would be grateful.
I will do as you ask.
I'm sure he knows, but it might be worth reminding him. That whole Skidmore circle who congregate at Bassett, they're all solid for Suez. We might be slumped in our chairs, but they're euphoric. He might remember that and look to his rear-view mirror a little more often.
Roger called me into his office one morning during a respite from cabinet meetings. He wanted some instructions given to the scientific committee. He said nothing about Suez. His secretary interrupted us to say that Monty Cave, who was often a friend to Roger, was asking to see him.
A group of our more sympathetic backbenchers has asked me to call on you. They want to know if you are under any particular sort of pressure over this Suez business.
I don't know what you mean.
We're your friends, you know. We are searching for a way to maintain some respect for the cabinet.
Oh, surely you don't imagine I would breach cabinet confidentiality to tell you what was said?
Well, it wouldn't be the first time. You've dropped the odd hint when it suited you.
You're wondering what I said in cabinet. I'll tell you. I said a few words about the damage I felt the invasion might do to our interests abroad. Then I shut up and said nothing more. Absolutely nothing at all.
Well, I'm sorry to tell you, I think you should have done.
Oh, do you? Then it's time you learned something about politics. You know, I'm sick and tired of having to explain myself to everyone every step of the way. Yes, I acquiesced in a disgusting example of violent international intimidation. The point is, nothing I could have said would have made the slightest difference, and I'd have lost any credibility I might have had in cabinet.
I do not agree. You'd have been recognized as a man of honor.
Oh, that's naive nonsense. I've taken on the job of making the world safer, and at best, I've got a 50-50 chance. I would have had no chance at all if I'd spoken up any more against Suez. I don't care if you think I'm a trimmer and self-server, but please don't come here trying to teach me some nobility.
Then Gilby reappeared and turned his return to the House speech into an opportunity for revenge on those who'd kicked him out of the cabinet. He had worked out that the enemies of Suez had been his own enemies. The world seemed to be turning dark around Roger, and it was only the fact that Caro was famously pro-British action in Suez that helped deflect the evil eye from her husband.
You know, the main thing Roger has got wrong is that he assumes there is a body of voter opinion out there that's anti-imperialist. And anti-nuclear, for that matter.
I agree with him on that score.
You and he share the same cloud cuckoo land, Lewis. I run a little session for the poor end of Roger's constituency on Monday afternoons, down past the end of Cromwell Road and Earl's Court. All the frightened and neglected elderly, they're pro-Suez. It makes them feel safer to know the country can still do things like that. And the workers? The ones with jobs on the underground and in small factories, and who are in unions and vote Labour. They support our actions in Suez too.
Those people don't understand the real issues. You can't take their opinions seriously.
Oh, that's the funny thing about you Democrats. You don't really like universal suffrage, do you?
I am ashamed of our government.
Well, most people aren't. We ought to have stayed in Egypt and seen it through. That would have pleased the voters even more.
Oh, Caro. You ought to know better.
I am not going to get annoyed with you, Lewis, because you're a friend. What you need to understand is this project of Roger's, this thing about not building missiles and so on, well, it's flying in the face of the party and the voters. And he'll be very lucky indeed if he pulls it off. I want you to look after him, Lewis. He can't fight on more than one front at a time. Roger is in shark-infested waters, and he needs you to protect his back.
While others were still complaining about Suez, Roger was looking out for opponents he might have to engage when the report of the scientific committee was published and his policy ambitions came out into the open. He drip-fed them items of half-truth in order that his objective wouldn't come as a shock. He felt that Brzezinski now needed to be groomed to accept failure when it came, and Roger wanted me to be the messenger. A few days before Christmas, I took Brzezinski to lunch at the Athenaeum.
I'll show you the candidate's book on the way out. You'll see that you've been nominated for membership.
That's very pleasing. Who has nominated me?
Francis Getliff, Walter Luke, Hector Rose, myself. Everyone involved with the scientific committee, as a matter of fact.
That really is very kind.
How do you think it's going?
Let me ask you a question in reply. Where did Walter Luke and Francis Getliff go together after today's meeting?
I don't know.
To continue drafting the report without me.
The minister is extremely grateful for all you've done on his committee.
He's fine, man.
The minister authorized me to say that he's put you down for an OBE in the June honours list. Of course, you mustn't mention it.
That kind of reward doesn't matter. What counts is that we get a long-range missile.
The minister is extremely grateful for the advice you have given.
And it will be soon time for him to turn that advice into action.
Yes, of course. But you do understand that what a minister can do on his own is actually pretty limited.
I'm afraid I do not understand you.
You mustn't expect miracles. Roger Quaife is prepared to go further than most ministers would, but he can't do much without the support of his colleagues at all levels.
I still do not understand you. Or, at least I hope I do not understand you. We have been discussing issues this afternoon on which no agreement is possible. It is now time that the minister took a view. He must use his authority to carry it one side or the other.
He could in some circumstances.
Yes, these circumstances.
I don't think you should count on it.
Why not?
The minister is bound to listen to his advisors. He can't just favor one side.
I think I understand. The minister is not to be allowed to make up his own mind. It is clear that you have manipulated the membership of the committee to engineer the outcome you want. It is also evident you have controlled the flow of information to the minister. And that, should Roger Quaife undertake to support my program of missile development, you will mobilize your bureaucratic allies in the effort to stop him.
I repeat, the minister is very grateful for all the effort you've put into this work.
In the future, I will not deal with you. I shall go straight to him.
That may not be possible. He is usually very busy.
I have always known we are at war. I had not expected the battlefield to be so close and yet so quiet. But this is England, after all, and you commit your crimes pleasantly. This government cannot ignore the opinion of the Americans on the matter of nuclear weapons. Have you considered that the Americans may take a view on British scientific advisors and civil servant as well, particularly if security issues are involved?
Professor Brzezinski, you must do what you think best.
Then suddenly, Brzezinski disappeared off our radar screens. The noise of falling post-Suez debris subsided, and a quiet government putsch prompted the PM's resignation. Westminster fell silent, then 3 days later breathed again with the news that Charles Lenton had been invited to take the highest office. Within 24 hours, the Prime Minister had set himself up with a working confidant, Reggie Collingwood. The gossips all agreed that Roger's stock was on the way down. Then he was summoned to dine with Lenton and Collingwood, just the three men alone. Margaret, Caro and I waited on tenterhooks at Lord North Street.
Roger, how did it go?
I don't know how it went. It gave me the impression I was in. Didn't have anything to worry about.
Oh, well done, darling.
I can't believe it. I get the feeling things might change. I'm in favor now, but it may not be the same in 12 months' time.
I don't understand.
Darling, what on earth could be wrong?
The PM was cordial. Collingwood went out of his way to be friendly. If I didn't know better, I'd say he actually liked me.
Well, why shouldn't he?
Why should he? So far, they've been perfectly content to let me crawl my way up, fighting every inch of the way. And now, for the first time, someone has beckoned to me and said, "Come on. There's room for you up here."
They're telling you you're in.
Then why am I so worried?
We were in the thick of the terror known as the Cold War. The debacle at Suez had damaged Britain's standing at the top table, toppled a prime minister, and made the new Conservative government very nervous. I was working in Whitehall alongside the new rising star of the Tory cabinet, Roger Quaife. The prize on offer was the greatest of my career. Against type and precedent, Quaife was working on a plan to scrap Britain's atom bomb. It was something I believed in with every fibre of my being. This proposal would soon be published in a white paper that would mark an astonishing turnaround in Conservative thinking. I was worried about our enemy Brzezinski and decided to confide in my colleague, Douglas Osbaldeston. Brzezinski made it clear he thinks I'm the reason the committee is made up entirely of people who won't give him the time of day.
Not entirely correct, but not far off it either.
He detests Francis Getliff and Walter Luke, thinks I put them on the scientific committee to thwart his plans, and that Roger has somehow been duped by me. Now, instead of making a hullabaloo, Brzezinski's gone totally silent. I phoned Imperial College on Monday, and no one has seen him for a week or more. I have to assume he's cooking up an ambush. But if I can't find anything out, then the first I'm going to know is when it blows up in my face.
Brzezinski will realize sooner or later that Quaife only has him on the scientific committee so he can be managed. But if he brings Quaife down, you will come with him. I have to say, Lewis, I think you've been sailing close to the edge for some time. I don't agree with what Quaife wants to achieve, but I see my job as being to support my minister, whatever his political hue. But that doesn't mean bending the rules the way you have.
You think I've gone too far?
Yes, I do.
I feel like I did during the first year of the war. Suez has really put the wind up me. I'm afraid of the bomb, Douglas. Afraid for my family. Afraid for all of us.
Perhaps if we are so close to the brink, then it's even more important we stick methodically to the rule book.
In September, with the House in recess, Roger still kept coming to his office and one afternoon asked me to accompany him to St. James's Park.
I think there's going to be a spot of trouble.
Has Brzezinski done something?
Not to my knowledge.
Has Lord Collingwood said something to the PM?
No, nothing like that. It's not a political issue of that kind. I'm having a relationship with a young woman. Her name is Ellen.
I see.
We kept it absolutely quiet, but someone's found out and now she's been threatened. That's why I'm telling you.
I can't believe it.
What? That a young woman might want me?
No, I can't believe you would risk a scandal at a time like this. It might kill your plans to get rid of the bomb stone dead.
We can get the white paper through. I'm sure of it. But we'll need to keep this other business out of the newspapers.
Who do you think has found out?
I've no idea. It was a muffled voice on the telephone. But she didn't recognize him. The thing is, she's frightened. I've never seen her lose her nerve like this.
It would be best if you got a good,
tough lawyer right away. Someone they won't want to tangle with.
I rather hoped you'd help us. You impressed a lot of people the way you handled that business in Cambridge a year or two ago.
Are there any rumors yet?
No.
Then it ought to be possible to stop the whole with some firm action. I'm sure this can be handled. I think you ought to tell her that.
Why don't you? Would it be all right if she telephoned you?
Yes, all right. What do you think Caro will do if the news breaks?
I expect she'll stand by me in public. That's the way with Tory wives. But I hope she never does find out. I'll be damned if I want her hurt by all this. And there's something else. Ellen is married to an MP.
Oh, bloody hell.
Do you think I should end this affair?
I assume that's what you'll do.
But the thing is, neither of us wants to stop.
Are you saying you won't give her up?
I suppose so. Listen, Lewis, I'm sorry if you feel compromised by all this.
I don't. Not yet, anyway. Just a bit grubby.
My wife, Margaret, was away visiting friends in Bath. Next day, she returned and we rendezvoused at the corner house on Trafalgar Square before going to the theatre.
Damn him.
Shh, Margaret, you have to keep your voice down.
Well, what's Caro supposed to do?
This isn't just about Caro.
He has behaved atrociously, and she's the one who's going to have to face it out.
She might never know.
Don't be foolish, Lewis.
Roger isn't the first person in the world to forget his obligations.
That isn't fair. Would you rather I'd stayed with Geoffrey?
I didn't mean that. You're being oversensitive. But we know both of them, and we can't start taking sides. Besides, Roger doesn't want to hurt Caro.
You mean he's afraid she'll go off the deep end when she finds out? Well, putting aside the fact he's behaved shoddily, what about the risk to this policy he seemed so convinced about? Well, surely we're talking about a serious lapse of judgment. This is a man who has set out to save the world and now appears able to compromise everything for the sake of some below-stairs affair.
There's nothing below stairs about it. She's married to a Tory MP.
Oh, my God. Who?
I don't know. Roger wouldn't say.
Oh, of course, the party aren't going to be very happy about him carrying on with the wife of another MP. And there's the question of what Caro might do herself. She's paraded her love and loyalty. She's pulled strings for him all along. Caro comes from a proud family, and if she's wounded, she'll return to type. I think she might be very dangerous in a situation like this. In fact, if she finds out you've known and not said anything, then you might have to watch your own back, Lewis.
Douglas Osbaldiston said pretty much the same thing the other day.
Well, surely he doesn't know about this.
No. He was referring to the way I've been helping Roger.
Well, at least you won't be splashed all over the Daily Mail. You'd have to sell secrets to the Russians before they take any notice of you.
A few days after Roger's confession, my principal, Sir Hector Rose, called me to his office. After I traversed the 10 yards along the corridor, I was greeted with the usual energetic thanks for this great athletic feat.
My dear Lewis, how very, very good of you to come.
It's chilly in here.
I find I've developed an alarming propensity to nod off if I don't get fresh air these days, Lewis. Now then, a new cabinet advisory group is to be set up.
What's it about?
It will oversee the process of drawing up Roger's white paper, which, as we all know, is due to take its lead from the scientific report you're working on. Obviously, if Quaife is going to represent government policy, there are some people who will want to dabble their fingers in it. You and I are to have the inestimable privilege of attending some of their performances.
Who's going to be on it?
Lord Collingwood will be in the chair.
Which is as good as saying the PM will be present.
Indeed. And the others will be good, solid Tories, too.
This means something, doesn't it?
From the outside, one might assume it's a plan intended to strengthen Roger's hand. So, on the face of it, there ought to be advantages for policies which our Mr. Quaife has taken to heart.
But what do you really think?
I have a suspicion there's something more. Roger Quaife is that contemporary and unpopular rarity, an intelligent Tory. I think I ought to warn you, Lewis, that knives are being sharpened. And I might add, for your own benefit, that if I were close to a certain politician, I'd start looking over my own shoulder when I hear the PM has offered him extra support.
Are you saying that I am being talked about?
If it were the case that rightist elements were listening to a disenchanted voice, and that voice had implied that a particular senior civil servant had been aiding a campaign which might be working against the feeling of the party, then I could understand how some Tories might want that individual neutralized.
When I did receive a telephone call from Ellen Smith, at first I had no idea who she was. Then, moments into the conversation, the penny dropped. I told her we shouldn't speak on the phone and offered to call at her flat. She was small and slender and would have looked insignificant next to Caro Quaife, who was, by contrast, confident and splendid.
It's kind of you to come.
Is it?
This is damned awkward.
I've remembered where I saw you.
Where?
At the American ambassador's house in Regent's Park, the night of Suez. Roger said you were married to an MP. It's Jack Smith, isn't it? He's the MP for Brighton West. That's who your husband is.
That's right.
Look, I'm no great shakes at this, but if I'm going to help, I suppose I ought to know as much as I can.
Fire away.
Where is your husband? How are you managing to carry on in this way?
Carry on?
Sorry, I didn't mean it like that.
That's what you think we're doing, don't you? Well, from the moral angle, I'm afraid it gets worse. My husband is in a mental home, in a little place on the A23 called Gatwick. He's unlikely to get better, but for the moment it's been kept quiet. Most people would think I ought to stick by him. But he's got much nastier over the last 2 years. The truth is, if he hadn't got ill, I'd have left anyway. I suppose there must be something wrong with a woman who marries a man she can't endure, and then falls for one she can't marry.
I married a woman who was ill. She stole my best years. I understand what you've gone through.
It's surprising what one can get used to, isn't it?
But surely your relationship with Roger can't be doing either of you much good.
Roger and I aren't at all miserable when we're together, you know. I'm happier now than I've ever been in my life. And I think he's happy too.
How long have you been seeing each other?
18 months. Do you think I ought to give him up?
Do you think you could?
I don't know. You see, I believe in his political objectives. I think he's noble. So God help me if I were the cause of all that being ruined.
What about the threatening telephone calls? Have you been to a lawyer?
Yes. He's had my calls intercepted. Now the blackmailer sends notes instead.
Can I see them?
Oh. They're polite and businesslike. He says he knows when Roger visits me here. Apparently he has documents which prove everything. What do you think?
This all looks carefully orchestrated. It's political. I'm sure of it. Can I take these away?
What for?
I know people in the security services. They're absolutely discreet. And I'm certain they'll track him down. Now, I must go.
I wanted to ask you, do you know Caro well?
Yes, I know her.
What's she like?
Never mind about that, Ellen. Good night. I hadn't wanted to like Ellen, but she touched me nevertheless. On a Friday evening in October, a week before the new session of Parliament, and with politics very much in the air, we were invited to a shooting party at Bassett. It was a weekend which taught me more about the behind-the-scenes workings of political power than anything else I had experienced. we were again guests of Diana Skidmore, the English widow of a wealthy American banker and a Tory centrepiece of several decades standing. The shooting parties set out on Saturday morning. It was a beautiful autumnal day.
I don't imagine Roger had even been near a shooting party before he met Caro.
Well, he's convincing enough, don't you think? Lolloping tweedily along as though you were born to it.
Come on, you two, don't dawdle. And I thought you'd enough of romance by now at your ages.
Morning, Reggie. Roger's convincing in other ways, too. You wouldn't guess he was getting second suppers elsewhere, would you?
He's got to play happy families, hasn't he? I just hope he manages to keep it up.
We'd better hurry along. Mustn't miss Lord Collingwood starting the slaughter.
I was out with some Americans a week ago, and, you know, some chap referred to it as hunting. So I raised my gun, bagged a bird, turned straight towards him and said, "I never hunt."
Margaret and I felt rather frayed by the chilly day and constant sound of shooting. Then, when we were dressing for dinner, I received a summons to meet Roger in Collingwood's bedroom.
Ah, there you are, Elliot.
We've received a cabinet paper.
About what?
It's from the Minister of Labour. He says, a sudden slowdown in our nuclear weapons programs would mean unemployment for at least 7,000 men, most of whom are specialists who would be difficult to assimilate elsewhere.
May I see? This would embarrass the government. Furthermore, any longer-term changes to weapon research and production would produce large pockets of unemployment. This would be unacceptable to the electorate. The government has to be sure of its intentions.
This here is what I'd call a sighting shot. They're getting your range. But this hasn't been cooked up in cabinet. I'd have known it was coming.
Who do you think is behind it?
I think our Minister of Labour has been growled at by some interested party. Most likely a company that's concerned it will lose out on government contracts.
I could offer a few guesses on that score. But the important thing is they have to be careful not to overplay their hand. The PM isn't going to stand for strong-arm stuff.
Yeah, unless it's a lobby group who will stick together and won't flinch if we start barking, then they might be more of a menace.
There's always going to be government contracts, and they'd be fools to make enemies of this administration. They know that.
Yeah, that's just maybe, Quaife. But look here, I think your scientific committee needs to finish up its report pretty quickly. Then my little advisory group can have a look at their findings. And I think perhaps we should consider keeping the report within government and not publish it after all. Once we've had a good think, you can have a go at drafting your white paper. You see, this letter is right in some ways. Opinion within the party has to agree with your white paper before it's made public. We can't push the party further than it wants to go. Your white paper will need to comfort the party. The thing to remember is this is a conservative white paper we're drawing up. Yes, that's the thing.
Can I ask you a question, Reggie?
Of course.
Where do you stand on nuclear weapons?
You know, you're not going to get everything you want, Quaife, but if you're clever, you might get something.
As the weeks went by, it became clear that Collingwood and his cronies were out to emasculate Roger's white paper. They had the measure of him, and they weren't having it. Roger was beset by problems. The party, his future, his affair, and we all felt his vigour diminish and his certainty cool. It was as though our efforts were sinking into the sand. Then, at the November Fishmongers' Hall dinner, one of the series of city events which afforded ministers a policy platform, captains of industry sat in Tudor gowns tipped with fur and politely applauded as their guest of honour, Roger Quaife, stood to speak.
I don't need to tell anyone who has fought that war is hell. But nothing any of us here has experienced on the battlefield can begin to compare with an exchange of nuclear weapons. And so, we all know the bomb must never be used again. For if it is, then our grandchildren will curse us. If there is not worldwide control of the number of nuclear weapons or their deployment, how many countries do you think will have the bomb within a decade? And why will they want it? And how do we feel about the combination of nuclear weapons and political or religious evil? And how can we arrest this slide towards a possible catastrophe? Well, I can't give you the solution. But thank God we are blessed with great scientific and strategic minds in this country. And I expect that sometime soon we may begin to evolve plans for which our grandchildren will thank us.
This was Roger's breakout. It was fantastically exciting for those of us who'd begun to think the cause was lost. Not only did Roger get away with it in the Tory press, but he was also being hailed as a hero of the left. Then later, the same week, I noticed an item in the Times which explained Brzezinski's silence. He was in America. It read, Los Angeles, Dr. Brzezinski, a British-based physicist, in a speech here, attacked the new-look British defence policy as defeatist and calculated to play into the hands of Moscow.
Thank heavens I've caught you. My secretary has just brought me notice of a parliamentary question. It's a bit of a mess, so I assume it's been cooked up in a hurry.
What's it about?
The MP concerned is the extremely reactionary member for Henley, and I reckon it's a put-up job.
Read it out.
To ask the minister if he is satisfied with security arrangements for his department, especially among its senior officials.
They think we're spies. Someone's decided that's how they're going to get Roger. I've been through this before, Douglas. It's horrible for everyone, and unfortunately, the mud does tend to stick.
It's a pretty bloody nasty trick. Roger must not answer the question himself.
Won't it be worse if he doesn't?
If Roger stands up to answer this, it will make him look embattled. Leverett Smith, he's the man for this little job. He's a parliamentary secretary without an idea in his head, as a result of which he's trusted implicitly by Tories in the House.
Leverett Smith doesn't like Roger.
I'll tell him the minister wants this business killed stone dead, that Leverett Smith carries the confidence of everyone, and the minister believes he's the man to do it.
Has the minister seen the statement made by Professor Brzezinski on November the 3rd, which has been widely published in the United States?
Yeah. My right honourable friend has seen this statement, which is erroneous in all respects. My right honourable friend, the Minister, acknowledges with gratitude the services of his advisers on the scientific committees and elsewhere. These men are one and all of the highest integrity and devoted to the national interest. As a matter of standard procedure, Her Majesty's ministers and advisers are subject to rigorous security vetting.
Will the minister produce the dates on which certain members of this scientific committee, the names of whom I am willing to supply, were last submitted for security vetting? Some of us are not prepared to ignore Dr. Brzezinski.
Sit down! This supplementary question is covered by my last answer. The question is also an unworthy reflection on gentlemen who, often at great sacrifice to themselves, are doing valuable service to this country.
Roger kept his head down after the initial flurry of the Fishmongers' Hall speech. I had given him the rough copy of the scientific report, and I assumed he must be working feverishly on the white paper, somehow managing to weather Collingwood's interference and straining to keep Ellen under wraps.
I hear Leverett Smith was pretty good.
You'd have taken it personally and it would have shown. You know, I don't think Brzezinski is about to just disappear.
No, his stock is too low to be taken seriously. He's done himself a lot of harm in the scientific community by going on.
I thought I saw Ellen coming from the Strangers Gallery.
She'll be going straight home. We can follow in a few minutes. She's getting jittery. I'd like to check to make sure she's all right.
Why did you want to see me?
I've got something to say to you. It will also help to cover where I'm going. You can say the address to the taxi driver just in case someone overhears. What's the matter?
I don't think Leverett Smith has solved the spying issue.
I understand, old boy. Now let's go.
When Roger and I arrived at Ellen's flat, she immediately threw herself into his arms, and they kissed passionately. I saw from their eyes they would have liked to go straight to bed.
Aren't you going to take your coat off?
We can't really stay. I just wanted to make sure you're all right. I'll see you later in the week.
It looked as though Leverett Smith did rather well.
Not too bad.
Will the question do any lasting damage?
I don't think so.
I'm pretty sure we'll hear something from the security people.
What about Brzezinski?
I don't think we've handled him well.
I wish we could have Brzezinski done in.
I hope you're not going to say that to anyone outside this room.
I can't help it. It's the way I feel. There are some others I'd be pleased to see gone.
Our situation is no fault of my wife's.
I know. But who do you think is behind these telephone calls?
So they've started up again?
I've been thinking, Lewis. I wonder if we ought not to revise our tactics over the white paper. Our plans for scrapping the bomb.
What do you mean?
Well, the consensus is that it will take the Russians 10 years to achieve technological parity. So that gives us a few years until their planes and missiles can effectively penetrate our defenses. In reality, that gives us a little time to play with.
But the weapons still exist. They're still as deadly. It only takes one bomb to finish us off.
I think we need to get our heads together and thoroughly think through our tactics. What's going to be right 10 years hence might be dead wrong now.
For God's sake!
Lewis.
No. People have committed themselves to you, Roger. You can't get cold feet now. Is this a political tactic, or are you running scared in case your affair comes out?
I beg your pardon.
Now, I put my career on the line. Not for your sake, but for the cause you told me you believed in.
I don't think it's much use carrying on this conversation. I just think we need to be a little cautious, Lewis. We'd better go. We should use the alleyway to the mews at the back. I'll go ahead. You follow in a few minutes, Lewis. Goodbye, darling.
Goodbye. I can see why you're angry. But you have to understand, things are changing between Roger and I. It's not enough anymore.
I'm really not interested.
I would do anything if I could just be close to him all the time. Day after day, forever.
I was shaken and worried that Roger was getting ready to throw away everything we'd worked for. Then one morning in early December, I received a telephone call from my man in security.
Now, your blackmailer is a fellow called Hood. Montague Hood. Ring any bells?
No.
Now, there's a photo here. Pleasant-faced, cherry-cheeked Pickwickian type. Currently working as an exec at Imperial Aircraft.
I do know him. I reckon Imperial have put Hood up to this. They think they're most likely to lose out if aerospace contracts are cancelled. How did he get onto Ellen Smith?
Well, Imperial have got strong American connections. The Yanks can find out anything if they set their minds to it. Bye, Elliot.
It was 3 days after Christmas that I attended a memorial service at St. Margaret's Church, Westminster. It was in honour of old Sir Thomas Bevel, who had died at 88. I had worked for and admired him during and after the war. Sir Hector Rose took me off for a slow walk back to Whitehall, and we both remarked on the general meanness of Bevel's writing off.
So far as I know, our masters are about to take the rather unusual step of approving a white paper containing some common sense. I hear there isn't as much common sense as I'd hoped for, mind you.
It's nearly there. We've redrafted the damn thing so many times I've lost count, but no, there is enough common sense in there to make one feel Quaife is onto something worthwhile.
One is grateful for small mercies. Whether they stick by it when they get under shot and shell, well, that's a different matter.
Is there something wrong?
I've had to spend a lot of time with the security people in recent weeks.
I had no idea.
Nor should you. It means some of our most eminent scientific advisors are going to be put through a security investigation. Not very elegant, I'm afraid.
Why didn't the PN's office say no?
Washington. That fellow Brzezinski has had a considerable effect over there. The transatlantic telephone lines have been pretty busy. Sir Francis Getcliffe is a well-known left-winger. The Americans have combed every speech he's made and have assumed we're too stupid to notice there's a Russian agent in our midst.
This is absolutely appalling.
You might have noticed that our masters are not at their most confident when dealing with a suggestion from our American allies.
I know Francis very well. I've known him since we were young. He's proud, and I really doubt he'll agree to this.
You must tell him he's got to.
Why should he?
Duty. It will be humiliating, but the alternative is to be entirely cut off from real scientific research. It would be the end of his career. Your other friend, Walter Luke, he'll have to put up with it too.
It's an insult.
My dear Lewis, most of us are insulted in one way or another towards the end of our careers, but that doesn't permit us to abdicate. He's the best scientific mind we've got, the authority behind Quaife's white paper. You'll just have to swallow his pride. And I'm afraid the same procedure is going to be applied to you.
You're joking.
Sadly not. If you were to refuse, then of course you couldn't remain near defense work.
I wouldn't want to leave for that reason.
I know. I've done my very best to deflect this ridiculous intrusion, but it is going to happen nevertheless.
I rang Francis in Cambridge that night. I was angry, and I was frightened too. I had the intense, mescaline vivid sense of being watched. Ellen telephoned later that evening and asked me to meet her and Roger in a Pimlico pub next day. They had resolved to take a strong line with Hood, and we agreed to a short note saying they knew he was the blackmailer and he must stop right away. Despite all the distractions going on around him, Roger remained focused on the white paper. It was at times like this that his raw energy came into its own. I was exhausted as we worked until dawn, night after night. Somehow we managed to get a draft white paper out before the House reassembled in the new year. It wasn't the declaration we had hoped for, but it had teeth. It turned down the idea of Brzezinski's new missile and also suggested no more British atom bombs should be made. Everything else was overtaken within just a few days by the arrival of a security man called Monteith.
You've had a most distinguished career. You will understand that I have to ask you some questions on certain parts of it.
Of course.
When you were a young man in Leicester, you were politically active?
I made a few speeches in pubs, attended rallies.
You were quite far out on the left, though, weren't you?
I believed in socialism. I had all the hopes of my time, but I never carried any of it through into my professional life. I was too ambitious in other ways.
It's natural for young men to be interested in politics. I was myself at university.
Were you?
Like you, but on the other side. I was on the committee of the Conservative Club.
Not exactly chairmanship of a nihilist cell.
Quite so. I have a list of the committees you sat on before the war. Would you glance at this? Tell me if it's correct.
Is that right? Yes, I think it is. Yes, that looks correct.
In the course of these activities, you mix with people whose politics were very extreme.
I think I ought to ask you to be more specific.
You will appreciate no one is suggesting that you were at any time a member of the Communist Party.
Good, because I wasn't.
But you had friends who were. I'm thinking particularly of Mrs. March.
Anne's husband and I have been intimate friends since we were very young men. I met Anne at Charles's father's house 20-odd years ago. They dine with my wife and I 3 or 4 times a year.
Then you don't deny that you have remained in close touch with Mrs. March.
Anne March once invited me to join the Communist Party over lunch at the Ritz. I laughed and turned her down. I have been involved with sensitive government work for many years, but it has never occurred to me to drop my more left-wing friends.
Yes, I was interested to discover how remarkable your circle was. But that isn't the point, is it?
I haven't altered much as I've got older. I'm still a socialist in my heart, but not a radical one. I believe in honour and duty. And I really don't think the security services need to worry over me.
few more questions, if you don't mind. Just before the war, your first wife made a rather large donation to a certain communist.
She would have done it because perhaps one rainy afternoon in a cafe in Chelsea she fancied herself a communist. There wouldn't have been anything more to it.
I have informed myself about your tragedy. I don't need to ask you anything more about her. But about you. Just after the war started, you attended a meeting of the Relief Fund for Ukraine.
No.
Please think again.
No. No, I definitely didn't. The RFU was a front organisation. We all knew that. It was a recruiting ground for Moscow. Very ineffective, as I remember it.
This is very curious. My evidence is from someone very reliable. He saw you there.
I know, I'm sorry, no.
Sat near you, remembers how you cut your hair, said you stood and made a speech.
Who said this?
You ought to know I can't reveal my sources.
Monteith, you have to understand there are a few embittered old commies out there who'd love to take a potshot at me this way. That's where this information came from, isn't it?
You have no right to ask such questions.
If I had attended one of their meetings, then I wouldn't have minded saying so today, but the fact is I didn't. And that represents a serious inaccuracy, which contrasts, rather, with the entirely factual details you've given so far.
I will look into it.
I assume you will give a report of this meeting to Sir Hector Rose?
I shall.
Then I'd like you to mention this particular matter. And I'd like you to say that I requested you should do so.
I would have done that anyway. I have evidence that you were opposed to the use of the atomic bomb.
But I didn't do anything about it. That wasn't what I was there for.
I was going to ask more about Barford, but your brother's successful interrogation of the spy Sawbridge speaks for itself. And your evidence was crucial in the conviction.
I'm not particularly proud of that.
You should be.
I think 15 years was cruel. A disgrace.
That's as far as I want to go. I can tell you now, I believe what you told me.
I'm glad.
Thank you very much for being so cooperative.
I waited in my office until Monteith had finished with Francis Getliff. I had promised to drive Francis to Liverpool Street in order to speed his escape back to Cambridge.
If it weren't for you and Roger, I wouldn't have let myself be subjected to that. Oh. Politicians never take care of the likes of us. You're useful so long as you're useful, then you're expendable. I expect if this thing doesn't come off as he'd like it to, then Roger will play safe and run for cover. He'll act the gentleman and go back to the fold, leaving his advisors to soak up the disgrace.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize Monteith would get to you like this.
Oh, they won't dare to say I'm a security risk. But when all this is over, win or lose, somehow it will become convenient to stop involving me in committees and appointment boards and so on. It will be better to have safer men. And that will mean I'm progressively cut off from my work, which is, currently, coincidentally, the best I've ever done.
I think you're underestimating how much you're needed.
No one is needed that much.
You're too thin-skinned.
You know I'm right. Oh, let me off here. I'll walk the rest of the way. It'll be quicker.
A few weeks later, having returned from America, Brzezinski turned up at a meeting of nuclear experts at the Royal Society. Walter Luke and Francis Getliff were there, and the session broke down amidst appalling face-to-face recriminations. Brzezinski stated openly that he expected a nuclear war and looked forward to a depleted population saved from the curse of communism. Shortly afterwards, my American scientist friend David Rubin telephoned saying he'd been trying to see Roger. He had been rebuffed because Quaife was preparing for the House debate on his white paper. Rubin was annoyed and insisted I set up a meeting. We arrived at Lord North Street at about 9:30 in the evening. Caro and Roger were just finishing dinner.
It's nice to see you both, but I hope you understand just how busy Roger is.
Well, you're here now. Sit down.
I came to tell you to get out while there's still time. If you don't, you'll cut your own throat.
Get out of what?
Your plan to get rid of the British nuclear deterrent, then to press for worldwide arms reduction.
Why do you think I should pull out?
First of all, let me say, Everything you're trying for is sensible. Anyone who knows the facts knows you're right. There can only be two really capable nuclear powers, the Soviets and us. From your own economic and military point of view, the sooner you get out, the better.
And that's precisely what you once told me in this very room.
What's more, we want you out. Nuclear weapons ought to be concentrated in as few hands as possible. I'm ready to predict, before too long, the U.S. will be pressuring you to give them up.
You're not making a very good case for Roger to pack up, David.
But you can't press ahead, Roger. There's a time and a tide in politics, and it isn't now. If you carry on, your colleagues won't be able to stay loyal to you.
Why?
Washington may not want a British nuclear capability, but it's worried about your motives for wanting to give it up. They're going to make it clear that's how they feel.
It would be appalling if they tried to interfere.
They already have. The thing they fear is that you might be trying to slide sideways out of the Cold War. Put your plans to one side for 5, maybe even 10 years. Then you'll be swimming with the tide, not against it. Sooner or later, Washington will be begging for you to do exactly what you can't do now. You're a valuable man, Roger, not only to Britain. We can't afford to waste you. But if you don't step back now, you will be ruined in politics.
You've made the situation very clear. Thank you.
Roger.
It's all right, darling. The problem is, David, I think if we don't go for halting the madness of escalating weapons production now, then we never shall. Weapons production is spiraling upwards and no one feels they can stop it, and the outcome might be no one left. Full stop.
The light on Big Ben shone gold in the clear January evenings of early 1958. The House had reassembled, and it was party season. Margaret and I went out for dinner 3 times a week. The faces revolved like an onstage army, and Roger and Caro were always there, looking as impregnable as the rest. Roger maintained a capable manner, and ripples of admiration flowed along the corridors. Even the middle-grade civil servants responded well, those who usually only wanted to get home and listen to long-playing records. Closeted in a stall of the Gentleman's Convenience, I overheard the popular view.
My God, the old bleeder's going to get away with it. Just goes to show, if you go on talking sense for long enough, you wear 'em down in time.
When I mentioned my perception of the mood to Hector Rose, he responded wryly, although I could see he yearned to believe in Father Christmas.
Sancta Simplicitus. Oh, by the way, Monteith has been in touch. That false piece of information you protested about, it has been checked. He's satisfied it was an honest mistake.
February came, and at the end of the month, Roger was due to deliver his speech on the Defence White Paper.
The opposition has put down a motion to reduce the naval defence allowance. What do you make of it?
It's an opportunity to discuss the use of naval vessels as platforms for nuclear missiles, and an attempt to force you to talk about the White Paper in advance of the debate.
I thought what I was trying to do would at least find support within the Labour Party.
I wouldn't be surprised if there'd been some collusion with your own backbenchers.
I can withstand a handful of Tory defections, but if they vote with the opposition in any real numbers, then I'm a dead duck.
Then what we'd all feared happened. Margaret and I were dining with my old boss, Lord Lufkin, when he took me aside and said he knew all about Roger's affair with Ellen Smith. He wanted Roger to know he'd found out about Hood's blackmail, had poached him from Imperial Aircraft, and then sacked him 2 days later. Is it really a good idea to leave London right now?
They need me to help out at the by-election, and I'm feeling a little hounded. A few days away might be useful.
It's good to know Lord Lufkin's on our side.
Indeed it is. But whatever might happen to him now, Hood has still managed to deliver his coup de grace.
What's happened?
Caro has received a letter telling her all about Ellen and me and how long we've been seeing each other.
Oh, God. What will she do?
Oh, she's going to stand by me, put her face on things until after the White Paper debate. She said she'll laugh off the rumors and tell Collingwood to his face that it's all lies.
And afterwards?
She said she'll refuse to give me a divorce. Well, she wants Ellen out of my life. If I don't do as she requires, she will systematically disassemble everything she's done to further my career since we met.
Have you spoken to Ellen since?
Yeah. Well, she's triumphant that Kara knows. I saw a side of her I never have before.
That's because she really loves you. At the cabinet meeting next Thursday, your white paper debate's on the agenda. You'll have to be there to find out who's on your side.
I have to deal with the opposition motion first. Collingwood telephoned me today to say if there were too many Tory abstentions, then my white paper will be withdrawn. I'd better get my train. An MP has to show his face in the north now and again, I suppose.
The debate on the motion to reduce the naval defence allowance was to take place over 2 days, 2 evening sessions, at the end of which there would be a division. The first hours of the debate were good-natured. Then an MP called Trafford stood and the mood changed abruptly.
I am a loyal supporter of this government, but I cannot support the suggestions in the forthcoming white paper on the nuclear issue. I believe it to be the policy of an adventurer who wants to make his name. What else would you call a man who's done nothing of note except to inveigle his way into society? Some of us have compared him with my right honourable friend, the member for Brighton West, but not favourably, I assure you. For there are those of us who wish it was my right honourable friend, the member for Brighton West, who was standing there with the country's military future in his hands. For they would be safe hands indeed.
It was a shocking intervention. The member for Brighton West was, of course, Jack Smith, the ultra-rightist Tory backbencher who was currently languishing in a mental hospital and to whom Ellen Smith was still married. The reference would have meant nothing to anyone unfamiliar with the details of Roger's affair, but for the handful who did, it was a bombshell.
It's time this government stopped making eyes at political matinee idols and thought about the good, solid virtues of bravery and determination and fidelity that once made us great.
I had promised to phone Ellen when we adjourned. She cried with anxiety for Roger when I told her about Trafford's reference to her husband. I went to Lord North Street and was aghast to see Roger and Caro drinking champagne and guffawing.
Would you sit, Lewis? Do you know, I'm actually beginning to believe the old devil might manage it.
Yes, it didn't go too badly. I'm so sorry, Roger. I've got a taxi outside. Would you just come out and sign some papers?
Oh, what a bore.
I'll only be a minute.
Oh, never mind. See you tomorrow, Lewis.
Yes. Good night, Caro. What on earth do you think you're doing?
Opening another bottle shortly, I hope.
I have just been speaking to Ellen.
Good. I hoped you would.
She's terribly lonely. It's worse for her, you know.
Of course it is. But what do you expect me to do? I have to give Carol all my attention to make sure she sticks by what she said. I can't even show a moment's consideration for Ellen. If Carol picked up anything like that, she might just fly out of the door.
The next day began well. The Times was playing down the whole debate, and Trafford only got a couple of lines. Then, as I entered the lobby for the evening session, I saw the House would be crowded. Hector Rose shared the staff box with me.
What do you think?
There are 315 possible government votes. I'd say the white paper will definitely make it onto the floor if he gets 290. Anything under 280 and he's in great danger. Under 270 and it's all over.
When Roger finally stood, he looked relaxed. He was good-natured and soon had the House laughing.
I don't like it.
Why? What's wrong?
He's making light of it all. He will read as arrogance, as though he's put himself above the battle.
Most people in this country don't understand them. I'm not sure how many of us have actually even started to comprehend what it's like living with the reality of the bomb. And we have taken a great deal of responsibility upon ourselves, and we ought never to forget that. It has been said in this house that I want to take risks. Of course, all choices involve risk, but there are different kinds of risk. I believe if all the countries that end up having the bomb carry on manufacturing them and testing them, then sooner or later the worst will happen. Now that science has caught up with us, this country can't be a superpower any longer. But I'm certain that we can help. By example, by good judgment, by talking sense and acting sensibly. And so swing the balance between a good future and a bad future. That future is poised on a knife edge. Our influence upon it is limited, but it exists nevertheless. Now, I want to take that risk, and I don't believe we have a choice.
Shame on you! Order!
Roger sat down, and after a short silence, there was heartfelt cheering from behind him and one or two hears from the backbenchers opposite. But it wasn't an ovation. After the division, the voting came out ayes to the right, 186, noes to the left, 271.
I consider this unfortunate.
You said under 270 would be a disaster.
Yes, but 271 isn't convincing.
Surely he's got just enough to face it out.
I think, my dear Lewis, that you're hearing the answer.
I was crushed. Until that moment, caught up in the rush of it all, I hadn't realized how much Roger's policy meant to me. Next morning, there were headlines, questions in the papers, and rumours in Whitehall. It wasn't until I was about to leave that I received a message asking me to call in on Roger.
Someone is going to get rid of these bombs. It'll happen, sooner or later. Maybe I can still do it.
Do you really think so?
I'd have to start all over again. Without influence, powerful friends, without any money. It'll be harder than if I'd never done anything at all. I've written my letter of resignation. Will you read it?
Of course. I cannot persuade myself that I am wrong.
Oh, don't read it out loud. I've been worrying at it all day.
I think it's very good. It's determined, but elegant.
I expect it'll be accepted.
Yes, I have no doubt it will be. Where shall you go?
To Ellen. I shan't see Caro again, except when the lawyers want it.
I'm sorry.
Don't be. Not about Helen and I, anyway. Good night, Lewis. I want to sit here for a while. I doubt I'll see this view again.
Good night, Roger. As I left Roger's office, it struck me that politicians never understand that they can lose power until it has gone. And even then, many of them can't believe it. When I arrived home, it took Margaret and I less than half an hour to decide what I must do. Then we cracked open a very nice bottle of malt whiskey to seal the deal. I have outlived my usefulness. It's time for me to go.
I should have thought that was overstating the case.
I backed the wrong horse in a very open fashion. If I stayed, I'd have to do business with the people I was up against.
You have occasionally acted in a manner which would have been unusual for a career civil servant. The issue of Roger Quaife isn't the only one. The service has been prepared to put up with a trifling amount of embarrassment because we feel we have gained from your rather curious liberties. I don't want to overstress the point, but we have felt the service was better off with you than without you.
I know you have been very good to me.
It ought not to be beyond the wit of man to make a slight redistribution of your functions, to save blushes all round.
Thank you for that, but I'm afraid I want to go.
Why?
I want to be a private citizen again.
I take it there is no financial problem.
No.
You're lucky. I was very expensively educated, but I don't have a bean. I shall retire in a few months, and I shall be dependent on my pension. What a thought. Well, it only remains to us to make your departure as painless as possible. If you resign now, it will not go unnoticed. I suggest the discreet thing to do, the best thing for both the service and yourself, would be to allow a slight pause before you leave. The service likes to avoid drama and speculation. You understand?
Of course.
Will you stay until the end of this year? 10 months, much of which might be spent on vacation.
That would be fine. Of course.
In the summer of 1959, a year and a half after Roger's resignation, I attended an informal dinner along with all the usual suspects, except for Roger, who wasn't invited. He and Ellen were surviving in suburban anonymity, financed by a couple of directorships Lufkin had found him. But Caro was there, performing. True to his word, Francis Getliff had given up public life and retired to a house outside Cambridge and to his research. I occasionally met him for dinner in Hall at the college of which we'd been fellows. We would always reminisce about the same happinesses and the same dramas, and somehow never grew tired of them. At 54 years of age, the clearest images in my mind were of my old friend Roy Calvert, practicing in the nets on a crisp spring evening, and of my first wife's blank eyes as she stared at me from the comfort of death. Now, in my close circle, we usually talked about our children. We talked as though the future was easy and secure, and as though their lives would bring us joy.